So it seems like people are choosing an alternative to the US dollar, which is very bad news for Americans if the US loses its global reserve currency status. Do you think that's just noise? Do you think that's even a possibility? Do you think that this is just these countries like pounding their chest? What's your guys' takes on that?
Take it, Joe.
Yeah. So what I would say on this issue is that I think that the answer lies really in the middle between the two extremes. You'll see some folks that sort of say, the death of the dollar is here, that this is going to fall apart and go off the rails in the next year or two. And then you see other folks say this is, just we'll dismiss this. It doesn't really matter. It's insignificant. It's minor players. It's countries that, don't have the strength and hegemony of the United States. And I think the real answer is that you should, at least as what I expect that you're going to see continuing loss of what I would say market share of the dollar globally through the remainder of this decade and into the next decade. It's not going to be overnight, but it's something that is serious, and it's going to make it harder for the U.S. to finance its structural deficits. And so that's something meaningful you got to focus on, right? But this is still something where you're in the early innings again, and change happens, as we say, gradually then suddenly. And I think you could be waking up in 10 years, and this conversation will be far more serious, and it will be attracting policymakers' attention much more acutely than it is right now. Right now, you've got folks trying to do certain activities. They're trying to search for alternatives. They're not happy with some of the economic efforts of the United States and some of the features of the Eurodollar system, which is primarily what they're concerned about. However, what I will note is that you've gotten many examples, anecdotes in recent days, for example, like in India and Russia, where they were trying to structure trade deals, trying to structure the sale of oil in the ruby, right? And Russia said, no, we don't want your rubies. We want dollars. Go find dollars. And I can give you a dozen other examples similar to that, where structurally still, even if they're or they're settling other transactions in currencies other than the dollar, the actual face value of the contract, the notional value, the unit of account in Bitcoin speak and in money speak is still the dollar, right? Even if you don't have dollars themselves, when companies, entities globally are doing transactions, they're doing transactions where the face value of the contract says you owe $1 billion payable in your currency of choice. Okay, all of that activity, even if it's not specific dollar activity, it promotes the standard, the unit of account of the dollar globally, which is how many finance and transactions occur. The vast majority of finance and transactions occur globally.
Yeah, then what's your take on that, Dr. Ross?
Almost exactly the same answer as Joe. I agree with what he said, and just to add to it, I mean, and we've been talking about this for a couple of years. I think we're moving to a multipolar world, right? And this doesn't happen overnight. The calls for the dollar's demise are greatly exaggerated, right? I mean, it's going to be around for a very long time, but the trends are clear. It's clearly losing its status slowly as the world's reserve currency. And I think the world's reserve asset also is coming under question very slowly, though. This is going to take decades and decades to play out. I think a decade from now, most of the world's purchasing power is going to be in the US dollar system like it is currently, the Chinese yuan, the BRICS nation. I think that coalition continues to get larger and larger. And then Bitcoin as well. I think Bitcoin is kind of the dark horse that's going to sort of come up from behind and sort of be, interplaying throughout all this. It's hard to see how it's all going to play out. I don't think Bitcoin takes over the world, within 5 to 10 years. But it is growing quickly, and it's not even on the radar of many people, but I think it will be on everybody's radar 10 years from now for sure.
So Joe, and I completely agree with you, Dr. Ross, but it's interesting. So you say 5 to 10 years, I would say 15 to 20. I think Bitcoin's inevitable. Bitcoin's incentives stay winning. One of the breaking news that happened this week was the Kingdom of Bhutan since 2020, before El Salvador, was not only stacking Bitcoin, but using their massive hydroelectric capacity to mine Bitcoin. And they were all doing it in secret. They weren't telling anybody. And the only reason that the people found out was because of the Celsius lawsuit disclosure. And I believe that there's a lot of other countries that are doing something very, very similar. So I guess the question to you, Joe, is, the U.S. government gets a tremendous amount of power from basically weaponizing the money, right? Which is the reason as to why these countries are seeking an alternative in the first place. Not to mention U.S. sanction policy, which they use. I mean, you can't even make the argument that it's very effective, but they use it tremendously, specifically against countries that the U.S. government is not in good relations with. They have a lot to lose if people start to transact in Bitcoin rather than dollars, which, you know, kind of coincides with Operation Choke Point 2.0, right? Why the Biden administration doesn't feel so good about Bitcoin. So I guess my question to you is, you know, obviously they're going to try to stop it, but will they be successful? And what do you think on the legal front? What do you think they can do?
They can do well. We could talk for an hour about that. I mean, let me just go back for a second because I want to make one point. The dollar is really important, but what's more important than the dollar is the treasury market. One of the reasons why the global dollar system, the global euro dollar system works is because of the treasury market, which is the underlying collateral held by commercial banks that allow people to borrow against, lend against, do financial activity all on your treasuries. With that lifeblood of the treasuries, you can literally create money. And the commercial banking system can create money with those treasuries. So just to talk about the evolution of this and how it pertains to Bitcoin, right? What is a game changer in my mind, and I think as Bitcoiners, we tend to focus on what the government's going to do just because there's this sort of suspicion about the government in Bitcoin circles, rightfully so. But I think what's far more impactful is if you have private actors, the private commercial banking system, banks and non-banks globally, if they start to use Bitcoin as reserves, which I think is probably more likely than a lot of people expect, and allow you to borrow against, lend against, use Bitcoin as real pristine collateral, that's going to be a game changer. And it will be a game changer in how credit is available throughout the world with an underpinning asset that you have really pure knowledge of what it is, where it is, who holds it, no custodial counterparty risk if banks hold it. But putting aside, let's go back to your exact question, which I think you're saying, what would governments do? Okay. So in the United States, what I fully expect is that consistent with Operation Choke Point 2.0, and there's some great, Cooper and Cook has a great report about this. I have to plug that because it's fantastic. It's the best hour you could spend reading. It's a report by a very prestigious law firm that broke down all of the anecdotal evidence out there that shows there's been a coordinated, concerted effort by U.S. policymakers to clamp down on exchanges and exchange activity. And what I would say from a Bitcoiner standpoint, everybody should be hypersensitive to the fact that if you have any association or relationship with a US-based exchange, they are squarely in the crosshairs now. After the blow up of SBF and FTX and all that happened in 2022, right now, the policymakers have said, we're not going to get any legislation passed through the Congress. So all the enforcement chiefs, the CFTC, the SEC, the DOJ, go out there and handle it. Get control of this industry. And what you've seen through a lot of evidence now is that they're trying to make it harder to transfer money to exchanges. They're trying to, there's public accounts of ACH rails being taken down. There's banking partners that are being told, we don't want you doing business with these exchanges. And I don't anticipate a direct attack on Bitcoin or people that are holding Bitcoin. I see it as sort of a Cold War where they just say, fine, you want to hold Bitcoin in your self-storage, hardware wallets? Great. Have it all you want. But if you want to convert it to cash, if you want to get it into fiat, if you want to do anything with respect to, pivoting out of the Bitcoin natives ecosystem and having to go onto an exchange, it's going to become increasingly difficult. I expect new KYC requirements. I expect new requirements with respect to withdrawals, new requirements for money coming onto the exchanges and off. All of this will accelerate into the near future. And if you're a platform that is selling anything that could remotely be considered a security, I expect enforcement actions to come against you. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard about the Wells notice that was issued to Coinbase. The clock is ticking on the Wells notice to Coinbase. The SEC is going to file suit at some point before the beginning of September, because there's a finite date at which they have to file the suit. So you're going to see a lot of this activity. And I think the idea is maybe we can scare the general public. Maybe if we do enough of this, we can scare the general public into, you don't want to mess around with this crypto stuff because it's just too dangerous for your own good. And maybe that's the best way they think they can stamp it out. Just from a reputational standpoint, attack the institutions and make the general public think it's not safe to do business with these guys because of their association with terrorism or illicit drugs or whatever.